Thanks for downloading the Marcus Pie podcast.
Welcome to the Marcus Pie podcast on historicracingnews.com. This episode brought to you by lemoncoupes.com. Visit lemoncoupes.com to see the range of iconic sports and race cars manufactured with the original designs of the 1960s. Well, we're here on an idyllic morning, chilly but idyllic, at the Goodwood Motor Circuit, and we're in the race control building at the end of the pit lane, opposite the Duke of Richmond's lounge, which is atop the old airfield control tower. And it's in this building where at the race meetings, the members meeting coming up in March and September's revival, all the drivers' briefings are given. So it's a real hub of the race meetings. And I'm joined by Alan Brewer, who's the Goodwood Road Racing Company's General Manager. Alan, good morning. Great to see you. Busy time of year for you.
Very busy. And first of all, thank you for having me, Marcus. Yes, extremely busy. This is the time of year where we're effectively doing three things at once. We're going through the cycle where all our members are renewing for the upcoming season, so that's just coming to an end. We're busy planning everything for this season, and we've actually already started doing activities, and some of our members have just come back from a trip to Iceland just on Sunday as well. Wow. So we're into the event season already, and all guns blazing. Nothing
stops at Goodwood, clearly, and the Goodwood history at this airfield, West Hampton as it was, RAF West Hampton, dates back to 1948. Members meeting from 1949, and we're only a month away from the members meeting, which kicked off with the 72nd. We're now on the 7th of the modern era, and that's almost unbelievable.
Yeah, I think it's when the first of the mod members meetings happened, I think everyone was pinching themselves as they saw silk cut Jaguars drive down the motor circuit with stickers on the side. It was quite a strange moment, and it probably took 3 or 4 years for the event to really grab its own identity, if you like, and now it's an absolute staple on the circuit. It kind of bookends the whole historic motorsport season, so it's the first weekend throughout the whole of Europe really where the historic cars come out, and because we're not restricted to all the action and everything at the circuit being in period as we are at Revival, it gives us the opportunity to showcase some amazing modern machinery. And this year we'll have World Rally cars and Group B, Group C rally cars doing a sprint in various places that you might not have seen cars compete before on the circuit. Celebration of Tom Walkinshaw Racing and a huge range of Lotus 72s as well. So some really amazing modern machinery as well as the classic 50s and 60s racing as well.
Absolutely incredible. And it has, as you say, forged its own identity. It's a firm favourite with the competitors and the teams as well. It doesn't quite have the crowded paddocks, if you like, of the big 3-day event in September. It's a little bit easier for the teams to work on the cars when they come into the pits, and a bit more visible in that respect. But the spectators love it as well. The members and their guests and everyone else who comes together for this kind of pilgrimage to the first event of the season. A lot going on. Going back to the very, very first meeting, 13th of August 1949, the winners back then, Len Gibbs, Eric Thompson in HRG, 2 wins that day for Eric. John Craig, Jaguar SS 100. Rodney Clark of Connaught, one of his own machines. Dickie Metcalf with the Fiat Bellagio. And of course, Dickie won the very last meeting here at the final members meeting in July 1966. Dick Jacobs, that MG legend with a TA Special. Guy Jason Henry with Rob Walker's Delahaye was another winner, and Sidney Allard as well. So real great names from the sport. And I've even brought in the programmes from the very first and the last members meeting because I'm such an anorak. But we like anoraks at Goodwood, don't we, Alan?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we endorse that.
So in terms of build-up for your off-track activities, and how many members now do you have with the Road Racing Club?
So we've got about 7,000 members in the club, and that's capped due to the amount of facilities available. So we try and keep it so there's space for everyone in the various enclosures and the kind of exclusive access areas they have.
The right crowd and no crowd.
That's the thing, exactly. And then but what we found is there was a waiting list for around 5 years to become a member. And the Duke and my team were very passionate about making Goodwood more accessible to those that wanted to be more part of the family. So 3 years ago, we introduced a new tier to the club called the Fellowship, which has no cap, and people can join at any time. And that's just allowed us to provide that introductory journey into Goodwood, if you like. So if you're regularly coming to the events, but you want to become part of the family and understand a bit more about what goes on, get a bit behind the scenes without that long wait, that's the way you can get in straight away. And then lots of people within the fellowship then put their name down to wait for a membership place to come available as well.
Absolutely. And how many fellows are now in?
And we've got over 10,000 now, so it's proving really popular, and again from all over the world. And many aren't necessarily even coming to Goodwood, but just want to be part of the family. They get sent a lovely annual pack, again, which has got all the usual Goodwood touches on it. Lovely badge being modelled here by Tim next to me. So it's just a way to feel part of the family, and it's a growing community, and something again we're passionate about, because it's hugely important for us to allow this kind of the Goodwood story, if you like, and this passion for motorsport, historic and contemporary, to pass on through the generations. So anything we can do to make it accessible, is I think a win for everyone.
What's staggering to all of us enthusiasts, and one or two of us may have been here, briefly in our youths in the first era of Goodwood, is that the modern era is now considerably longer than the original, which is staggering. 1948 to 1966. And then 50 years later, 1998, from the race meeting point of view, 5 years before for the festival, and here we are already. It's extraordinary.
And I think especially, and if you consider, and that's at the circuit, and if you consider the Festival of Speed, which started in '93, was again only really conceived as a stopgap, to buy some time before the first revival happened, while the wait for planning permission was ongoing. And that's been going for over 25 years now, I think 28 years this year, the Festival of Speed. So you're absolutely right. The modern era is now kind of outgrown the era and period. And I don't think the Duke or anyone on the estate would have been able to imagine that, when these first events were started, that they would have taken on such a good following.
It's been hugely important to the estate as a whole, hasn't it? The profitability of it, the longevity of this long-standing country estate, and very far from the Duke being in control of a couple of dozen people to make these events happen. It's become an enormous staff, hasn't it, working all year round, Alan?
Well, there's around 700 permanent employees now on the estate, and that's not counting obviously all the part-time consultants and people that come in when we have the big headline events.
The weekend warriors
goes over into the thousands then. But what you said, it's all about balance, and lots of people know the estate because of maybe Glorious Goodwood, the horse racing or the revival. But there's about 26 or 27 business groups within Goodwood, from the farm, forestry, the hotel, golf courses, and all of them play a part. It's an incredible balance, and how the Duke manages, to wake up in the morning and have, forestry in his head, with challenges going on there, and then the revival, then members meeting, and then horse racing. But it all kind of comes together to form this amazingly balanced group of companies, and has allowed effectively the larger parts of the estate, so particularly the motorsport events and the horse racing, really allow the rest of it to be sustainable. And that's the whole mission of the estate, is simply that the Duke wants to be able to hand the estate down to the next generation in just a better way than he inherited it, and that'll be the goal of the next Duke as well, just to continuously improve it and make it sustainable in every way.
It's absolutely amazing. I've always loved coming to Goodwood. I used to love coming here as a competitor in sprints, etc. I used to come to report those events. I've been to pretty much every event of the modern era, and it's difficult to actually say, to pick a favourite among them, because they're all different. The members meeting, the revival, the Festival of Speed. I guess if I had to plump for anything, I'd probably go for the revival, because I'm a racing guy at heart, and I like to see head-to-head motorsport. And it's a wonderful mix of sport and theatre, isn't it? All the way across the three events, and that makes it different from anything else on the historic calendar.
I think the aim, and it's very much the precedent set by the Duke, but the competitions team who effectively select all the cars, the content that's coming to all those three events, their aim isn't to get 300 cars here; it's to tell a story. And so what they effectively want to do is to tell a story of what happened in period, or what might happen in the future. And the cars are simply, I think the way the Goodwood approached it, the cars are the actors, if you like. That's the content we hang the story around. But then where the Duke has this incredible talent, this eye for detail for his background in photography and filming. He worked with Stanley Kubrick on Clockwork Orange and various things. he can create that theatre, and that's been kind of come down throughout the whole team. And so when we put on our events, we get the cars here, we get the drivers, but that's just where it starts. So everyone, all the fans then come and they dress up, or they bring, so they get involved in celebrations and things we're doing. And that's, I think Goodwood provides that truly immersive experience. And one of the things we'll be celebrating at Revival this year is VE Day, which is in May this year, and in September we'll be kind of celebrating, we'll be effectively reenacting the VE Day announcement. There'll be a moment on Sunday on the circuit where everyone there will be invited to come onto the track and actually kind of almost go through a live reenactment of the VE celebration, and then cars will go and do parades around the track. Not race cars or military vehicles, but family cars, as what would have happened in period. So we can just do all these incredible things, but the cars and the drivers obviously provides the content, but then we lay on that theatre and that immersive experience on top.
I think it's absolutely extraordinary. And from here in the next 3 or 4 weeks, just building to that first event, you and your team are absolutely flat out. You kind of 24 hours a day, not quite?
Yeah, not quite. We will be. And members meeting actually in March is quite a nice opener to the season, because again, there's not a huge amount of extra infrastructure that goes up, and the circuit, unlike when we do the Festival of Speed, the circuit obviously is here year round. There's grandstands go up, but that's relatively straightforward. There's still a huge amount of planning that goes into it. But when you move on to the Festival of Speed, for example, that's a 2-month build process. You're effectively building a city from scratch with water, electricity, moving the sheep out of the park, and then 3 weeks time after the event, it's back to a pristine wood parkland again. But yeah, we're full on planning, and not just the members meeting, but all of our driving tours, our track days, and then everything else that goes on throughout the year as well.
Where else are you touring this year? Back from Iceland, you say?
Yeah, so the team have just got back from Iceland with about 20 members out there. We'll be going to Scotland in May, most likely Italy in September, and then more local visits as well. We're going to the Red Bull factory. Rolls-Royce are just down the road, so we'll be visiting those, and a number of track days here at Goodwood and further afield as well. So we do about 40 or 50 events year-round, so outside of the big motorsport festivals, about 40 or 50 events for the club to take part in. And there really is something for everyone as well. And we'll be here actually on Easter Monday, a couple of weeks after the members' meeting, for our members' sprint as well. So a huge plethora of cars for all shapes and sizes, from 2CVs up to Lola T70s, anything that the members want to bring out. There's a really eclectic mix on Easter Monday, and anyone's welcome to come and spectate there.
And I think that Paul Tarsi from historicracingnews.com is one of the commentators.
He has been known to commentate, yes, yeah. So you might hear his dulcet tones again.
Absolutely. Alan Brewer, it's been a privilege to have you here. Thank you so much for talking us through your season ahead at Goodwood, and good luck with everything. Back to the day job, I guess.
Yes, yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me, and yeah, best of luck with everything.
Le Mans Coupés are the only manufacturer that can produce both road and FIA HTP spec GT40s with GT40P chassis numbers. All cars are factory built to the original designs, and our race cars are eligible for international competition. We also produce road and race Cobras and Corvette Grand Sports. Find iconic 60s sports and race cars at LeMansCoupés.com.
Well, we're here on a chilly morning at the Goodwood Motor Circuit, and I'm joined by Tim Hain, which is an absolute delight. Great to see you, Tim. You have kind of dedicated a life's worth of enthusiasm and passion for motorsport, and encapsulated it into a wonderful book, Lap of Honour, which you published towards the end of last year. I mean, it is an extraordinary odyssey.
Well, indeed. And as far as you were talking about the history of the revival, I was initially here on a very grey Easter Monday in 1962. That was my first motor race. I was very, very young, and of course the only name on the grid that I knew was a chap called Stirling Moss. So of course I wanted him to win. The fact that his car failed and then he had a life-changing accident was definitely a baptism by fire for me, but I was hooked. And thanks to the Duke of Richmond, I've been able to have an extended 20-year second childhood, basically. Because the best days of my youth were definitely spent at racetracks with a camera. I first picked up camera later in 1962, when I borrowed my mother's Kodak Retina at Crystal Palace and got some pictures, and that again started me on a hobby where I got my own camera. By the time I was 14, I'd won the British Racing Automobile Club competition 3 times, after which they scrapped the contest. And then gave it all up when I was 16 in favour of an electric guitar. Unthinkable, really, but I came from one of those crazy backgrounds where, you know, people don't see anything as a career, you know, it's not kind of necessary. But funnily enough, had that not been the case, the magic of my own personal revival and the book would not have happened.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, those of us who are involved in motorsport as a career, and I've been involved in it for nearly 43 years now, you end up bouncing willy-nilly from event to event to event, and you kind of feel you have to go to these things. I think if you step back some way from it and you go to fewer events and better events, you get your pick of them, you get a much, much better view of the whole thing. I always wonder about 22 Formula One Grand Prix in the World Championship. That to me doesn't make it special anymore. In the days when you and I were growing up, there were kind of a dozen or so.
Yes. And it was always a thrill. I mean, I remember coming home from boarding school one Sunday afternoon and getting some scratchy reportage on in black and white telly of Dan Gurney winning the French Grand Prix. But such things were rare, and it made it, as you say, very, very special.
We used to see things like the latest Grand Prix on the BBC News in black and white on a television that was about 8 inches across. Yeah. And of course, the gentleman right behind us, Jim Clark, we're sitting under his portrait here, who won his first important single-seater race here in Formula Junior in 1916, a Lotus 18. And for me was so special because he won the first race for the Lotus 49 with the Cosworth DFE Ford engine on my 9th birthday in 1967. June the 4th, 67 went down as a special one. But he and Graham Hill, John Surtees, Mario Andretti, and many other great names are going to be celebrated here at the Festival of Speed this year with a great feature on maestros. But you kind of saw them all here, didn't you?
You did, and of course that day at Goodwood in 1962, that fateful Easter Monday, you know, Jim Clark was on the grid, Graham Hill was on the grid, Jack Brabham was on the grid, Bruce McLaren was on the grid. Probably the only name I might have known, other than Stirling Moss, was Jack Brabham, because I think I'd seen him in a Tintin book. His name had been mentioned or something like that. But, of course, when Stirling crashed, naturally the winner became the hero, which was Graham Hill. And then we had some family friends, the great unsung hero and long-time friend Dizzy Adicott, R.I.P., and Roy Pierpoint, who said, no, actually, you should be looking out for Jim Clark. So he then became the hero. And of course, it's written in the book, that magic moment when I was walking through a misty Aintree paddock on race morning in, I think it was 1963. No one about except Jim Clark and a friend reading a book, which was actually a thing called Automobile Year, when I actually have that copy. And I heard Jim Clark, as I walked up to him, say to his friend, "Ooh, that's a bit naughty," looking at a picture. And this little kid is kind of, obviously has the vibe of, ooh, what's a bit naughty? And Jim Clark very kindly lowers the book so that I can have a look at the picture of him in the Lotus 25, winning the British Grand Prix the year early with 2 wheels on the grass, obviously posing for the camera because that's what he used to do. But what a wonderful moment, and so natural, just so... You can't see that happening these days, can you?
Absolutely not. They're all so regimented, the drivers, and I'm sure they don't have such a good time. I mean, I know it was a dangerous era back in the 50s and 60s, etc. But it's a very, very different breed of competitor we see now.
Well, Stirling always says, doesn't he, "I'm glad I was in it when the fun was there, old boy." I wouldn't have swapped my era for this era for anything.
Exactly. What I find extraordinary about your book is you're not a writer, you're not a kind of photographer who's had a press pass at these events to get that right up on the track edge action, but your talent for both just shines through and illuminates this extraordinary book. It's an absolutely wonderful personal odyssey, a sort of trip through time, which I think is so engaging.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad that you of all people can feel that, because it has been very personal, in a sense, my own personal revival, but I never knew when I had that little ambition to revive my interest in photography after 38 years and get myself an old Pentax with a 400mm lens, very like the one I had back in period, which was then an Adixa, which it cost me 120 quid, and turn up on the Sunday of the first revival. All I wanted was a photograph of the hero who crashed, Stirling Moss. Never thinking, never dreaming that he would not only get to see that picture, but then he would become, the kind of the villain of the piece of a book 20 years later and accompany me on my second childhood, if you like. I mean, I never dreamed that I would be answering the phone to arguably the greatest legend in motor racing history, telling me jokes I would never tell my mother.
And you come from a very musical family, don't you? And
Yeah.
music is your first line business, it's your career. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, my father was a great singer. He used to tour, around Europe. Didn't do nearly as well as he should have done, but had this wonderful. I mean, I can't listen to sort of a bit of Pavarotti, whoever comes onto Classic FM these days, with that kind of sort of vibe. The operating classic.
You do
way of
that
singing.
so much better than I can. too.
But I can't do it without it sort of getting a lump in my throat.
Yeah.
And my sister Kit, she in 1979 had a hit record. She was one half of Tim Hain, "Dancing in the City."
The very one. No such thing as a free ride.
Yes, Free Ride, the name of the album. Yes, which I actually played guitar on a couple of tracks. And then I'd always been messing around with it for years and years. And then about 20 years ago, I thought, well, I went to America. I lost my driving license for something I don't want to talk about now. I was just basically I ran a yellow light on a level crossing. And for that, they reckoned I needed a year's ban. So before I went to court, I got myself an international driving license and went to America for a year, where I learnt so much about playing blues. I would hang out in Atlanta and San Francisco with all the best musicians. Came back and said, right, now I need to sort of form a band and start teaching myself how to perform and write and do all of that. I built a little studio at home. So I had a long apprenticeship of about 2,000 gigs, and then got to where we are now.
2,000 gigs to become an overnight success, eh?
Yeah. Well, there's always yes, and the first release is a book, which is kind of ironic.
It is,
but
it's that same. We talk about the Duke of Richmond's attention to detail, but
yes,
it's that same
incredible
detail that you've brought to the craftsmanship of the words. Yes, you're not writing for a weekly motor racing magazine or something like that, which helps, I guess.
Sure.
But it just oozes passion and quality.
Well, thank you. I think what it is that, I love to write songs. So writing in itself and crafting words is not new to me. Writing stories, as in the book, perhaps, but it's in a sense it's the same craft in a different field, and it's the same passion. It's like it's far easier if you're a pilot, and it's far easier to sort of, I suppose, change destination when you're already in the air than if you're still on the ground.
Because you're still piloting, you're doing it.
Because you're already up there, you've already got the momentum.
Yes,
I suppose.
Yes.
Little analogy, but yeah, it's passion that drives it, and I think it's passion that, I mean, you mentioned having to go to so many race meetings and this and that and the other, and have to go to this and that and the other, but I know you still look forward
it's not
to
a chore.
every revival.
Absolutely, very much so, very much so. How long did it take you to from kind of the germination of the seed of this book to getting it onto the shelves?
The history of the revival, really, because the idea came soon after. I thought, well, this is an interesting story. A young guy gets a camera and revives his whatever. Never knowing, it's the same with any creative thing. You can start from a seed, and then it starts to take on a life of its own, and you're just there to sort of be its guardian in a way.
Like the buffers on a pinball machine, you kind of guide it as you go along, as the days go by.
Yeah, and then I just started gathering information, and then, of course, meeting Stirling Moss was an incredible thing, through a family friend, and then he got in touch and invited me to his house for a chat, and of course I was, as you would be, he'd just been knighted, and I was terribly nervous on the way, but the moment Lady Moss, the moment Susie answered the door, I felt at ease. It's almost as if she'd been put on the planet to put people at their ease. And I've seen this actually at many times at book signings. You see people with that nervous thing, they're about to meet the great legend, and she's there injecting informality and fun to the whole thing. And the instant Stirling came in, because he was out on his scooter doing something, looking after his flat, his apartments that he leases and stuff, the moment he came in and sat down, my first impression was that this chap's actually really rather shy. And within minutes, I felt as if I was catching up with an old mate I hadn't seen for 38 years. So then he was just as supportive as could be, you know. The story began, at the end of the hour, which I recorded, and which is, that conversation is in the book, I said, well, I have an ambition to photograph you in as many cars as possible. I've got an idea for a book.
You've missed a few, old boy.
Missed a few. What?
You've missed a few down the years.
Yes, a few, yes.
There's a great book, All My Races, by Stirling, is a good guide to that, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, there's some lovely books, and I like Simon Taylor's one as well. That's really fun. My Racing Life, I think it's called. But at the end of this conversation, when we'd been there for an hour, just chattering away, I said to him, my ambition is to photograph you in as many cars as possible. Where are you going to be this year? And he said, oh, well, I've got to do the Gull Wing at the Festival of Speed, and I've got to race my old Ferrari, the short wheelbase at the Revival. And then he started going and saying, I've got to test an old Ferrari at Silverstone on Tuesday and a Cooper at Brands on Friday. And I sensed an opportunity and said, well, would it be cheeky if I turned up and took some pictures? And he said, come with me, old boy, just be here at 11 o'clock on Tuesday morning, you can come with me.
Wow. And
from that day, we've been sort of pretty much constant, contact, as much about, have you heard this joke about the whatever, as anything else. You know him, and he said something.
Oh, yeah, it's incredible. And, I don't know Stirling anything like as well as you do, and I wouldn't pretend to, but in the early 80s, I did have a fantastic weekend at Snetterton with the Historic Sports Car Club, when a friend, Tony Gordon, decided to run both his chevrons in an endurance race, and had this wheeze to get Stirling in one of the cars. And we had a super time there. I managed to find some sponsorship from a local motor dealer in Norwich to make it happen. Stirling had half of it, which was absolutely as it should have been. Should have had all of it, really. And had a wonderful weekend. And Stirling and the car owner, they won the race. And the late Roger Andreasen and I were second in the race in the little Chevron B8. And it was just so special to sort of look back and say, on one little weekend in the mid-80s, I was Stirling Moss's teammate. Yeah, and he talked about it for years afterwards.
Well, a slight parallel is that in 2007, I got Stirling to come to a studio to record much of the material that's in the book. I've also got a lot of it on film as well. Luckily, I stuck a little camera there. It's not HD, but it's charmingly not HD. So hopefully that'll be seen one day. So I turned up again very nervously at his house to drive him across London.
Oh wow!
So at first I thought, oh my God, this is I'm going to be driving something. I thought, am I going to be really nervous or am I going to show off? But thankfully, when I picked him up, he was kind of very grumpy about all these stupid people who send unnecessary emails and what a waste of time. So I picked up on that mood, and we both drove off rather belligerently. So we had great fun driving through the rush hour traffic, and he was a fantastic co-driver. Driving down Park Lane, and he'd be going, okay, old boy, there's a Porsche coming up in the left-hand mirror. After it goes, you need to move left now. And we were just totally in sync, and it was really, really fun. And then when we got to the end of the session, and
he didn't have Dennis Jenkinson sort of toilet roll navigation on the side
purely
from Mille.
He didn't have that. Sadly, well, no, we hadn't done the route beforehand anyway. But on the way back, he realised he was late for supper and needed to get a move on. I said, are you giving me permission to be Stirling Moss? He said, sure, old boy. So, we zipped back down from Shepherd's Bush to Mayfair, driving quite quickly, and I felt totally at ease. And Susie later said, if he hadn't liked your driving, you'd have known about it. But I was going to say, Patrick Stewart, who did that wonderful documentary I hope you've seen with Stirling, is the only person on the planet other than myself I know who's both been driven by Stirling and has driven him.
Oh, wow. That makes you a member of a very, very exclusive club.
And he's also a member of our club, which a musician friend of mine and I founded years ago. He works in LA with a lot of top musicians. We call it the LAF, which is short for the League of Advancing Foreheads.
Or as David Franklin, the great former British hill climb champion and still a fantastic racer, we've seen here at Revivals past, issued a little sticker when he was competing. Huntsman Garage in Bristol was his business. It's Team Huntsman. Baldies are best.
Yes, absolutely. We are, and I know that Stirling has often congratulated me on my hairstyle. He's I don't know whether he was envious or just, there was one moment I know when he was looking at a picture of the two of us and he started laughing. He said, "Look at the shine on your head," or maybe you're getting that off mine. I don't know. But it was a sort of we were brothers in baldness,
So you started off with an enormous number of images to kind of whittle down to a degree, I guess, for the book. And kind of what sort of magnitude did you run through?
Well, initially, when I took a girlfriend back to the old family seat in 1988 because she was a photographer and I wanted to impress her, I found that most of my old photographs and negatives had been thrown out by a careless parent, obviously, who needed the room.
Or the cleaner.
Yeah, but I did find about 60 usable images in various drawers and transparencies and stuff. So that was a start. And that comprises, they form the first section of the book. And then with the revival...
The Old Testament.
Yes, the Old Testament. And then there's the Middle Testament, I suppose, which is all the revival years. Because I've been to at least one day of every revival, and 3 when I could. Up to about 2008, it was film, and after that, it's digital. Because once you're on digital, you just... So yes, thousands getting
These days, you
down.
just snap away literally thousands a weekend, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
In the old days at Autosport, I think our photographers were allowed to take 2 reels of 36 from Croft or Rufforth or somewhere, and then go to the Red Star office and send them down to London. An old boy would go out and do his sort of his tour of those offices, bring them back, they'd get them processed, and hope there was something of the big winner.
Yeah. It's staggering when you think about it. I mean, I used to, run on, in the old days, two films, and if they were black and white, then by the time I was 14 or 15, I was developing and printing them myself.
Oh, that's very handy.
I never did colour, but yeah, digital is just let you go crazy. But I succumbed eventually when my second Pentax body just gave up the ghost. I thought, well, hell, I'll get a Nikon D90, and away you go. So from thousands down to about 600.
Really?
So yes, a huge process.
And then when you've got the, I guess did you have help with actually the layout of the book, or did you have an artist friend who could do it, or the publisher do it?
I did as much work as I could in preparation. Obviously I was just building up material and building up chapters, and then in a very fateful month was December 2016, because I was invited, of all things, this is another of my passions, along with Nigel Roebuck, I believe, is single malt whiskey. So I was invited to this thing called the Daily Express Whiskey Experience. Daily Telegraph, not Express, Daily Telegraph Whiskey Experience, where I met a woman who had published a book that the curator had just brought out. So she became very interested in what I was doing. We spent the exhibition together, tasting, and then she got in touch and said, my publishing company is interested in your book. They're called Red Door. I didn't eventually go with them, for various reasons. And then they had a friend who used to be the designer for Orion, and he said, and they said, he runs a car at Goodwood, a Jaguar. I said, not this one, and I pulled out my photograph of By One, which happens to be probably the most photographed car in the book.
Yeah.
And so me and this chap became really good friends, and he let me use the Jag to sit in to do the promo video, which eventually got a book deal with some people called Pitch Publishing.
Okay.
So yes, I then started a lot of work in 2016. I said, right, I'm drawing a line under it now. I'm starting to get all my material. I must put it into folders, JPEGs and the text, in preparation for getting this thing out. I say it's also fateful because that was also the month where later on, towards the end of that month, I got a call, funnily enough, from our local vicar who said, I hear Stirling's ill. And of course he was in Singapore, I think it was at the time, and I learnt about that. So it was a fateful month, but since then I assembled it, and then we actually got the deal. It was just about a year ago today
Okay.
And the deal was signed and it came out. The deal was announced, funnily enough, on my birthday, February the 4th.
Oh, okay.
Which was kind of cute. And then once that was done, it was about 3 months of solid work of sending each folder. I'd sort of arranged the book in what I felt was the right order, and I would send it to the designer, and he would send it back to me, and I'd say, blimey, this guy's brilliant. He's taken my... Because, you can be very pernickety and dare I use the word, anal about how you want it to go.
Yeah.
So when somebody sends you stuff back, and this guy, Duncan Olner, was really, really good. He'd send me stuff back that was better.
But you do want to exercise a kind of modicum of control or feel that you are. And then when you see a real pro who does this every day of his life...
Takes your vision and makes it better than you could have...
Yes.
And that was a brilliant experience.
Like a really good sub will always add to the value of the copy unless they get something quite magnificent.
Well, I felt I had to, in the acknowledgements, I had to include him and also the publishing company for having the balls to take a punt on a very different book.
Yes. And it hit the stands, if you like. It was available from last summer?
I suppose around the beginning of August, and it's a slow process. It's on Amazon, and I think it's in some branches of Waterstones. The first review came out just this month, thanks to Simon Taylor, a nice one in Classic and Sports Car. So it is like, I trust serendipity to make the thing grow. Just as, that day at Goodwood when I stood at St Mary's with a camera and got that one picture from Stirling Moss, and it's grown, So, as I say at the end of the book, theoretically, any one of the hundreds of photographers who turned up that day in 1998 could have done this, but somehow, as I say, serendipity, and I suppose a bit of my own chutzpah, chose me.
So, Tim, I'm fascinated. Were you always a musician as your kind of frontline career?
Always been a musician at heart. I guess the career and regularly earning at it started about 20 years ago, mainly because my background was one where initially work wasn't important. There was no work ethic. My dad never earned a penny in his life, never had to, and then he buggered off when I was 6 to Switzerland, leaving me to a fairly undermining mother, shall we say, and then a boarding school existence from the age of 8, being pretty much abused by a headmaster, and no one to look after me, no one on my side. I had to go through that on my own. In fact, the great hero of those days was Dizzy Adicott, who put the Buick in the Lotus, and therefore I say is the grandfather of Can-Am, and held the lap record here, held lap records everywhere, and he was a complete rebel, and he flew a Swift jet fighter from 2 miles down the road. So one afternoon, knowing what was going on with me because nobody else knew, and knowing that the headmaster hated the air traffic, he buzzed the school repeatedly one afternoon at 0 feet in the Swift jet fighter. This was the 60s, folks, before health and stupidity was invented.
Rather like Ray Hanna coming here to that first revival meeting in the Spitfire when he flew under our commentary box, which was interesting.
And eye opener. Well, yeah, boy. So yeah.
Dizzy was an extraordinary fellow, wasn't he? He was a test pilot of phenomenal repute.
Fantastic, and. It's one of the songs I've written for the album is "Don't it make you dizzy flying on the ground? Don't it make you dizzy when the back end come around? Dizzy, don't you ever slow down?" And that's the song which Charlie Morgan actually put drums on. He was Elton John's drummer, of course, for 15 years. He dropped in the other day, and he said, "I'll be insulted if you don't include me in your album as one of the racing people who's going to play in your album." And I said, "Charlie, you're Charlie Morgan. You've worked for Elton John. You're one of the highest paid drummers in the world. What can I give you for dropping in, coming all the way from Nashville to play a couple of tracks?" He said, "A glass of Lagavulin, old boy." So again, so music has always been a passion, and I've done about 2,000 years. 2,000 years. I've been around a long time, folks, but not that long. 2,000 gigs in the last 20 years. It's been a long learning process, learning about performing, learning about writing, learning about how to be a recording engineer and record it all. So I feel it's just now that I'm starting to reap the fruits of these and put all these things into actual projects that can be marketed. And I think we live in an age where, having done the book, that designer fellow I told you about, Lee Jones, he said, "I can't do a Welsh accent. I can do most, but not a Welsh one." But he said, "I want to see you get more out of this than just a book." So I think crossing mediums like I do a thing called Booze and Blues, where I go to a whiskey club and sing blues songs about whiskey and do a bit of a whiskey presentation.
Does the performance evolve the more you drink the whiskey? A bit like Bill Werbenick when he was playing snooker. He used to drink about 6 or 7 pints during his match.
Blimey.
And he said it was for medicinal purposes, and he played better at the end, apparently.
Well, I don't know. It sort of
I used to play darts better when I was drunk.
Did you?
Yeah.
But and I know I know the Bentley boys used to have a nip of brandy before they went out at Le Mans.
And Duncan Hamilton was another famous one for...
Drunken Duncan, they called it, didn't they? Yeah. Those were the days. And by the way, my mother, you mentioned Eric Thompson. She and Eric Thompson were very close friends. And at the one time I went to see Eric Thompson, he, like you, had wall-to-wall, immaculately stashed copies of Motorsport.
See Shamley Way or something like that?
Something
Guildford,
like that, yeah. Not so far from... yeah.
Close to Ian Young and
Yes.
all those kind of people. Yeah.
Yes.
Another great name of the past.
So...
How many events did you come to at Goodwood as a lad? Very many, or?
I would come at least once a year, maybe twice a year, maybe Easter Monday in the TT.
Yes.
Usually.
And we're very fortunate these days to have those amazing record books that Robert Barker, who was based locally down Hayling Island Way, put together, which annotate essentially every race meeting at Goodwood in the era from 48 to 66.
Well, doesn't that book... There's a book that was out years ago called The Glory of Goodwood.
There's
pretty damn
innumerable Goodwood books, but this one is great because it's a record, and for people who are absolutely passionate about statistics, like myself, I mean, it's really, really cool. And I have all the programs from the period and all the members and guest badges, which I'm told are going to feature in the members meeting program this year. A bit of a special thing on badges.
Brilliant.
And those days, they date back to the days of the pre-war days at Brooklands. Brooklands Automobile Racing Club became the British Automobile Racing Club, and BARC ran all the meetings here from 48 to 66, and of course still do the racing logistics. We heard from Alan Brewer of the Goodwood Road Racing Club. He's involved, and the wider workforce here at Goodwood in putting everything on that's sort of behind the scenes, but the actual racing stuff run from this very office which we're in now.
Well, I was in this office for the 1964 TT as a helper for the BARC because I knew Ted Lewis, who was the photographer.
Yeah.
And he reckoned I'd had lad, you've had a few too many privileges. You got to go and do your duty. So I was in here, for that afternoon. I did sneak a picture of the start, but sadly it was one of those pictures that got thrown out.
No.
Jim Clark, I think, on the Lotus 30 was on pole, and I think Bruce McLaren. I can't remember who the third person was.
So you worked as a kind of a junior, sort of in your weekends with the BARC.
Just on that one weekend, I was paying my dues.
Yeah, and I did the same thing.
Really?
At Thruxton. I went along in the early 70s. I'd have been about kind of 15, something like that, 15, 16, and got hooked into being a junior race assistant, which I absolutely loved.
Wow.
And one day, Simon Taylor's wife, Pearl, couldn't come along to lap chart, and I could lap chart, so I got hooked into doing it. Wow. And it was wonderful. We mentioned Simon Taylor earlier on. And
they came to one of my gigs at the Bull's Head in Barnes. Delightful
excellent.
Couple. Well, he's a big blues fan as well.
Right.
And, he had a lovely night, and it was great to meet them.
Well, you need to get Gary Fletcher, who's a great club racer, the blues band, in.
Well, funnily enough, Gary Fletcher, my harmonica, I say my harmonica player, he plays with everyone, but Alan Glenn was just on a little tour with Gary Fletcher. He'll be playing with me on Monday night at my birthday gig at the Bull's Head. Alan Glenn will. So it's funny how all these
wheels within wheels. It's absolutely unbelievable.
Love it.
And there are quite a lot of people within the motorsport world who are passionate about music.
Well, that's why I had that little vision about doing a CD, writing some songs, on the subject of this great subject, and getting people who race and play to play on it, which is why how come Charlie ended up coming in to drop a couple of drum tracks, and Nick Mason, when his new studio's ready, has said yes, he'd love to help play on a track, and source some others, I'm sure, along the way.
I think those sort of things will self-seed.
Exactly, they're self-seed exactly as this is. And of course, the other thing I didn't mention was in my roots. My grandfather raced an Armstrong Siddeley at Brooklands, won the something or other long handicap, the Brooklands long handicap, at an average. I can't remember what the average speed was. Captain Dennis Shipwright, DSO, DFC, and his car was known as the Shipwreck Special, which I don't believe was any reflection of his driving ability.
Just a nickname.
It's just what they called it. So that's all. And of course, my mother's first car that I can remember her driving was an MGA, and she and Eric Thompson were buddies. So all of that is in the genes. I did a lot of kart racing, 100cc karts, and won my class in the 1993 grand final of the National Kart Racing Association at Three Sisters. So I've got a bit of
got Ashton in Makerfield.
What?
Ashton in Makerfield.
Yes, Ashton in Makerfield. And I still, every now and then, I like to take a Rotax Max out at a local kart track, and somehow I always manage to put up the fastest time, but unfortunately I ache for 2 weeks afterwards.
I'm afraid that's evolution, old chap.
We ain't getting any younger.
Apparently not.
And yes, as a famous guitarist who I know a bit said to me recently, this growing old, it's not for wimps.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Great stuff. So to play us out at the end of his personal lap of honour, Mr. Tim Hain.
I'll make you all guinea pigs here because this has not really been sung, although I have to tell you something about this song. It's dedicated to your great fellow commentator who has a way with words. And I did a gig here, and we're playing this song, which is called Stop the Start Watch. And Stirling, Moss and Susie are standing there listening to this song, which is completely comprised of Murray Walker misquotes. There you are, I've given it a name. And he's got a very mischievous grin on his face. And later on, afterwards, he comes up and says, "Oh boy, I told Murray about your song." Of course, then we bump into Murray because we've got another session on film of Murray and Stirling looking at my photographs, which is also in the book. And Murray says to me, I say, "Do you think you could tell me if you're going to play that song again so I can go and hide?" These guys, their sense of mischief is so, it's brilliant. They're a different breed. Anyway, if I can remember all the words, it goes like this. Stop the stopwatch, 'cause Murray's on the mic. Stop the stopwatch. We're counting down red lights. Well, anything can happen, and it usually does. When Murray's on the microphone and his trousers are alight. His trousers are alight. Well, Michael Schumacher is leading Michael Schumacher, and Mansell can see him in his headphone. The car in front is totally unique, except for the one behind, which is identical. And unless I'm very much mistaken, and yes, I'm very much mistaken, I interrupt myself to bring you this. Stop the stopwatch, 'cause Murray's on the mic. Stop the stopwatch, 'cause we're counting down red lights. Now anything can happen, and it usually does. When Murray's on the microphone and his trousers are alight. That's right, his trousers are alight. Hell hath no fury like a woman ram. The atmosphere is so tense you can cut it with a cricket stump. And hell hath no fury like a woman rammed. Nothing wrong with the car except that it's on fire. And if that ain't an engine failure, I'm a Chinaman. And if I was Michael Schumacher, which of course I'm not, I interrupt myself again to bring you this. Stop the stopwatch. We got Murray on the mic. Stop the stopwatch. So we're counting down red lights. Anything can happen, and it usually does. When Murray's on the microphone and his trousers are alight. That's right, his trousers are alight. Now what's that bridge? Oh yeah, there's a bridge. It goes something like this. Sunshine by the truckload, glamorous women by the regiment. This is Grand Prix racing, Monte Carlo style. And a puff of smoke from Prost as he goes into the swimming pool. Stop the stopwatch. We got Murray on the mic. Stop the stopwatch. We're counting down red lights. Anything can happen, and it usually does. With Murray on the microphone, and his trousers are alight. That's right, his trousers are alight. Yeah, his trousers are alight.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you, folks, for being my guinea pigs.
Well, that's the end of today's episode of the Marcus Pye podcast at historicracingnews.com. This episode brought to you by Le Mans Coupes. Visit lemoncoupes.com to see the range of iconic sports and race cars manufactured to the original designs of the 1960s.